I'm going to continue now by tweaking this rear secondary wing as well as the rear limb, and we'll start doing a little bit of sculpting on this body as well. Chosen the pose tool just to kind of tweak the very end of this particular wing. And by the way, I've decided to give myself a mulligan on this rear limb because a lot of times many artists think that you're stuck in a linear workflow in 3D Coat, and indeed it's designed to facilitate a normal workflow between a high poly sculpting tool set, then retopology, then texture painting. But you can go back at any point in time and make large scale edits in the tweak room, and that's really what it's designed for. Again, if you need to give yourself a mulligan, or if your art director comes back with some changes well after you're into the texture painting stage, then that's one of the main tool sets you might want to rely on for that purpose. So again, that's what we'll do there, because at this stage I'm not quite certain on the sketch whether the knees are close in or if they're further out. It's a little bit hard to tell from the sketch, and also it looks like it's a little bit closer to the body, but given that the front limb, you know, that bending joint is much further out, so that's something that I probably would ask an art director for clarification on, because sometimes you might have a character that has piping on their uniform in the front and you can't quite tell from the artist sketches whether or not that continues in the back and how it terminates, and those kinds of decisions. So again, just please overlook the rear limb for now, and again, we'll address that in the tweak room once we get further down the road. Now, with that mentioned, I want to point out that what I just did was I uncached the hind leg layer. Actually, I made a copy of it just in case I need to get back and make some editing changes, as I mentioned, just to give myself a little bit of flexibility. And I cached that copy layer and I hid it. The original layer, I went ahead and merged it by shift dragging it onto the body layer. And as you can see, I'm now blending it with the body layer. I also stepped into the Preferences panel under the Edit menu in order to uncheck the option Remember Alpha for each brush, because sometimes you don't want 3D Coat switching back and forth between brush sets. For example, sci-fi brushes or skin wrinkles, things of that sort. Sometimes you may, and it really is just a matter of preferences, and that's why it's there in the Preferences panel under the General tab. At this point, despite what I think the sketch is showing, I'm going to lean toward having an elongated thigh region and having the knee toward the middle area right here, because I think a creature like this is going to probably need powerful thighs or rear limbs in order to clear itself from the cleft of a rock, or maybe the tops of a large tree or something like that. And from this sketch, it has pretty puny rear limbs, so again, that's something that you probably would easily take up with an art director or whomever the concept artist is, and try and hash that out. But there are times where your art director may be tied up in meetings all day, and you don't have time to sit and wait for a decision, so you may have to leave a part somewhat undone or unformed and just try to move on and take care of that later. And that's what, again, that's what I'm going to try to show. I'm also going to hold off until we're in the paint room much of the high frequency detail work, because one of the main benefits of 3D Coat is that you don't have to work on a uber high poly sculpt in order to get high resolution detail. You can work on a pretty modest system and still get extreme levels of detail by using image-based sculpting in 3D Coat's Paint workspace. If you're coming from another sculpting application and you want to know where the sculpt layer capability is, well, it actually resides currently in the paint room. I know Andrew intends to implement sculpt layers here in the voxel or the sculpt room later on, but for now it resides in the paint workspace because you can stack multiple layers of detail per object. It doesn't matter. You can use mask for it. You can increase or decrease the scale of the depth per layer, or you could do it locally using a brush. It's a very non-destructive type of workflow, and especially the ability to blend the depth layers together. Granted, this does split your sculpting workflow into two different stages in the pipeline. Nonetheless, we'll use this as an opportunity to see how this particular workflow fits in a practical setting. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm using the pose tool just to tweak the tail a little bit, both to elongate it and widen it somewhat. And with this legacy pose gizmo, you may have noticed me using these quick axis orientation buttons. You can quickly orient it along the X, the Y, the Z, or you can quickly flip it in the opposite direction. Now using the ring selection mode in order to widen or narrow certain parts of the tail section here. I'm going to select the upper wings layer in the move tool. I'm going to tweak this back section a little bit more. Back to the pose tool, make a line selection. Quickly line it down the Z-axis. If I switch to an orthographic side view, then I know when I click the quick orientation button that it will align it not in screen space but along world space. Alright, so I'm going to switch to the grow brush and try and smooth the transition between the wing and the tail here. Go back to the move tool. Nudge the edges a little bit. I think that's about it. Now I'm going to focus right here on this opening in front of the rib cage. Just going to try to make it more narrow and a little bit smaller. Back to the pose tool, choose select with pen. I can use a brush or I can use one of the selection modes inside the ePanel. So I'm going to the ePanel and choose the absolute draw mode, and I find that whenever I'm smoothing, especially with the pose tool, it's much faster than using a gradient type of draw mode. So Go to front view in orthographic. Just trying to line that toward the center, and now just nudge the entire thing upward. We scale it down just a smidge. Okay, come back out of orthographic view. Got a little bit of cleanup to do. Must have been a few areas that didn't get selected very well. Use a smooth brush. That's a really nice thing about voxels. It's so forgiving. You don't have any Boolean mess to deal with. You can clean things up rather quickly and easily. Go back to the build-up brush. Okay, so we're going to pick up in the next video where we're going to start working on the talons and probably more in the head region as well. So stay tuned and we'll see you next video.